Let's look at the fidelity of the mock-ups and the simulators and the hardware that astronauts train with. If you look at the shuttle program, the simulators and the hardware was high fidelity, and the way we trained with it was very mature. The whole training environment for shuttle was a well-oiled machine. Now, if you look at space station, it has a lot more variability to it than the shuttle had in terms of racks going up with different configurations, the variety of equipment that you might deal with on space station. It's not all built in. It comes up and it might be bolted on the side. You have something completely new that you never even saw before until you got on orbit. It's really difficult to make high fidelity mock-ups. And oftentimes we will be training with mock-ups that will basically be a cardboard box with paint on it, or a few hoses that were purchased from the local hardware store sticking out with duct tape holding them in the cardboard box. And when you train on hardware like that, it's better than nothing at all, but it doesn't give you the same skill set as if you are training on high fidelity hardware. And just an example, is you look at quick disconnects. And these are fluid hoses that have moderate pressure fluid inside of them, and you have to disconnect this hose, and you have a little bezel, you unscrew it and it pops and off, and you've got the hose in one hand and the fitting in the other hand, and there's a check valve that's supposed to close on each end of that. When we do our training on these things in the mock-ups, usually the hardware is something that again came from the local hardware store. It isn't even flight-like, and you don't get the look and the feel of how to operate these quick disconnects. If you do it incorrectly, it doesn't spew water or fluid out all over the floor and on you when you're doing the training. However, when you're on orbit, if you disconnect one of these SAIDs and you do it in an incorrect manner, it will squirt fluid all over you. And just an example, these check valves for a quick disconnect hose, if it's been connected for years and years and years, and now you're the lucky astronaut that has to disconnect this one hose, those check valves may stick in the open configuration. And so when you disconnect that hose, the check valve is going to close, and it's going to spew whatever the fluid was all over you and the room and everything. And what you learn to do is, instead of just loosening the check valve bezel, you tighten it about 1/8 of a turn, just a little bit before you loosen it. And by tightening it, you work that check valve and you unstick it. If it happened to be stuck, by tightening it a little bit, it cycles the check valve just a little bit, gets it freed up. So when you then disconnect the quick disconnect, the chances of that poppet valve, the check valve, the poppet on the check valve popping into place and stopping the flow, the chances of that happening are going to be increased. And you don't learn how to do that kind of thing unless you're working with high fidelity equipment, particularly something that's going to squirt you in the face if you don't do it right. You're going to remember that a long time. And by having high fidelity equipment like this on the ground that you train with will hone your skills and set a bit in your memory so that when you're working with this stuff for real on orbit, you will deal with it in a highly skilled way. For a spacecraft that's as complicated as space station, that's always in the process of changing, you can never have high fidelity equipment for every single thing that you might run across. So the decisions that need to be made here is to figure out what pieces of equipment need to be high fidelity, and the skills you learn from those will be applicable to those pieces of equipment, and possibly similar pieces of fittings and connectors and things that will still be used on other pieces of equipment, although in a different configuration. And an example of that has to do with our carbon dioxide scrubber. Initially, we had low fidelity carbon dioxide scrubber where almost nothing in this mock-up was like what it was on orbit. And now the program is providing crews a high fidelity carbon dioxide scrubber. And this is a piece of equipment that we seem to be fiddling with quite frequently on orbit. And by training crews with similar fittings and similar connectors with all the possible interferences and all the foam coverings needed for the low temperature tubing and all the stuff that you have to deal with in this high fidelity mock-up. This is an example of putting the limited resources we have into a mock-up for training so that we can get the skills that crews need.